Hey everybody, what's going on? I'm your host, Forrest Carpenter, with another episode of Field Facts with Forrest. Thanks for joining us again today. And man, I gotta say here, it is the dog days of summer. It is 96 degrees inside this hangar and I am dying. I gotta get an air conditioner in here or something because this is hot. So I'm gonna get right to it. Today, we're gonna talk about the difference between hunting geese in fields on windy days versus calm wind days. All right, there's a lot of differences we're going to talk about, mainly decoy placement, calling, and there's a couple other things how you want to hide that I want to touch on today. So we'll jump right into it. We're going to talk about calm wind hunting geese. All right, so we want to spread our decoys out. You've heard me say in the past on lots of episodes, we want to spread our decoys out, make them look realistic and relaxed in the field. Not like they've just landed in the field, but like they've been in there for a little while and they're very comfortable. So when I'm talking about spreading these decoys out and making it look natural, I'm talking typically 3 to 7 steps between decoys because geese typically, in the majority of situations, I would say, are fairly spread out when they're relaxed. There are times when it's real cold, other things like that, where geese will be a lot tighter, but typically, I'd say probably 7 times out of 10, I like to set my decoys really loose just to give it that nice, relaxed, natural feeling. So calm winds are a great time to do that. Spreading your decoys out, especially downwind if you have a wind, is really nice because in the case of lessers and specks and snow geese, it gives them an opportunity to swing way out, get down low and work their way up, kind of crawl to you and crawl to that landing zone, as opposed to spinning right over the top of you and trying to find your hide. So again, the more ground you cover, the harder it is for them to pick out where you're hiding, typically, if you've done a good job of making sure you're hidden. Next thing I want to talk about is on no wind days. Again, here it is for the 4th or 5th time. If you don't have wind, don't use socks. No wind, no socks, all right? And I'm gonna keep repeating that because it's just not something that's gonna work out well for you. Socks, while they look great when there's even the slightest breeze, it works out really, really well. When there's no wind, they just don't look right. And even though our decoys hold their shape really well, you might get by, but you're gonna notice that birds typically aren't as apt to decoy into socks on a calm wind day as they are when there's some wind blowing, all right? So just keep that in mind. So when I'm hunting on calm wind days, I'm taking the socks almost entirely out of my spread. I'll use very few or 0 socks on no wind days, all right? When it comes to calling on a no wind day, I like to typically be, once the birds are coming at me, again, this is kind of all things considered, birds are coming at me and I'm not running traffic. Once the birds are coming at me, I like to lighten up a lot because you don't have wind distorting your sound, especially if it's a cold day with high pressure. That sound is going to carry. It's going to be crystal clear, and not only can it be loud enough that it scares the birds out of your kill hole, but it's also going to, like we talked about in the specklebelly episode and the A-frame episode about using sound to your advantage, not your disadvantage, it will help them find your hide on a no-wind day because there's no distortion, there's no moving of the sound. So keep that in mind. For that reason, I like to call as little as possible on calm wind days. Just give them enough to keep it coming, keep them coming right where I want them to, and no more. All right, I am a big less is more guy when it comes to calling, but especially on calm wind days, I feel like that's important. When I mentioned something else that I want to talk about as far as calm wind days, think about how the birds are going to work. While we might spread our decoys way downwind in hopes that they're going to circle and work in nice and low and work right into our kill hole, the odds are they're going to circle us a time or two. They don't have wind helping slow their ground speed down, letting them work down and lose a lot of altitude quickly, and they're more likely to start way up high on those days without wind. They're more likely to start up high and have to circle and work their way down. So when you're getting set up for this, you want to think about, am I hidden from where the birds are going to be coming from their approach, we'll say. So on a no-wind day where they're circling, I like to make sure I am hidden from above. Whether you're in an A-frame blind on the edge, when you're putting tumbleweeds over the top or coming up with a way to hide the top of your blind, or layouts, or laying in ghillie blankets under the S5 socks. You want to keep all that stuff in mind while you're hunting, that the birds, when they work around, are going to be looking at you probably from above. So make sure you've got something covering the top of you to make you hide a little bit better when birds are working over top. So that's the last thing I wanted to talk about with calm wind day hunting. Now let's move on to windy days, all right? So pretty much the polar opposite. And with all of these things, I'm going to act differently. So with the decoys, while I'm a guy that loves to see a whole field covered in V2Fs, I am going to run a tighter spread. And tighter meaning not necessarily all balled up in one little spot, but I'm not going to string them out downwind as far. Where on a no-wind day, I might string them out as far as 400 yards. And yes, I mean 400 yards. I actually had a gentleman ask me about that and wasn't sure if I misspoke or not. No, I mean 400 yards, I'll spread a spread out on a no-wind day. But on a windy day, I'll keep every decoy within 100 yards downwind of me. I may spread some groups really wide, but I don't want geese to be landing way out there and short stopping me. So I like to keep my decoys closer to my feet and closer to my boot bags there on those windy days, or on an edge hide. I like to make sure that they're not strung out too far downwind, because I don't want them stopping down there. I don't want one side of the blind getting all the shooting and possibly causing a safety issue where you get someone who's a little bird hungry on the upwind side swinging too far down. Best case scenario, you got some ringing ears and maybe some tinnitus in the future. Worst case scenario, I don't think we want to talk about that. So keep that stuff in mind on a really windy day with the decoys. Try to get them to come upwind. Try to get them to come all the way to you, or if you're crosswinding them, try to get them to come even with you or past you. So when you start shooting, man, it can work out really well. If you can get them upwind of you and start shooting, a lot of them aren't going to know where the shooting's coming from. So they may come back over the top of you and give you 3 really good shots, or even a chance to reload and take a couple extra shots as they're trying to get out. So that's a really great strategy, and we're going to talk more about that later on when we talk about creative ways to set up spreads. But that's one of the big things. Don't set your spread up too far downwind on those really windy days. On those windy days, those are what socks were made for. They're wind socks. Set them up. Winds from 5 miles an hour to about 40 is where I like them. And you can run them in higher, but hunting of any sort higher than 40 miles an hour wind, you guys who have done it know it's pretty miserable, and there's nothing that is really designed for, that kind of wind. You can make it work, stick those socks all the way down to the ground, put those beaks on the ground. Same thing with your silhouettes, stick them all the way in, or get your stakes in and then slide the body down and to where it's flush with the ground, and they won't be moving quite as much, or they'll have a smaller chance of getting blown out of the ground entirely. So keep that stuff in mind. When you're wanting to hunt on a windy day, those socks are going to look really, really good. And they're going to give you a lot of movement. Whereas on a calm wind day, the only source of movement you might have would be a flag, or maybe like a robotic decoy of some sort there in your spread, trying to make a little movement. On the windy days, the more movement you can get, the better it is, because typically you're going to be hiding in the spread or in the vicinity of it, and movement is going to distract the birds. It's going to keep their eyes on the movement, whether that's socks moving or you bringing a flag up and kind of moving it around and giving them something to look at. All the movement that you gain on a windy day is one of the big reasons why typically you'll have more success on windy days than on calm wind days. So take advantage of that, throw some socks in your spread, and see if you can't get a little bit of more realistic action there. Next thing I want to talk about there is calling. And calling on the windy days, typically you can get away with a little bit more calling, because again, just conversely to the calm wind days, you do have some wind distorting it. You've got volume that's going to be differentiated, and on those windy days, I like to use a higher pitched call, because like we talked about in the Specklebelly episode, it's pitch that carries, not necessarily volume. While having a loud call is beneficial sometimes, it's the pitch that really carries the tone for hundreds and hundreds of yards and is going to sound the best in those high wind situations. Even when I'm hunting big geese, I've got my half breed or my short mag, it's really loud call tune, super high pitch, so I can get their attention, get them coming my way, and keep them coming my way, keep them enticed with those really nice high pitched, aggressive, sharp notes. They just seem to love it, and they seem to key in on it when it's really windy, and I've just had better luck calling a little bit harder on those windy days. Now, again, this is typically, there's plenty of times where I'll take it easy on them and it'll work great. And I am always a less is more kind of guy, but having a little higher pitched call and getting on them just a little bit more than usual has yielded the best success for me on those windy days. Now, on those windy days, geese fly lower, typically. A lot of times they got to come up to get over the power lines and then come get to you. So keep that in mind. Again, it's back to that, what angle are they approaching from? If the geese are working lower, now instead of primarily being concerned from being hidden from above, we're concerned about those geese looking in under those S5 socks. So we want to make sure that we either build a wall of them in front of us, or I like to run silhouettes around everybody. And I don't mean run a circle around every single person that's laying out there, but I like to use, in cases where we're laying in the decoys, silhouettes to cover the boot bags or to cover your feet, kind of hide them and kind of hide your shoulders, and I'll put some between guys to just kind of break things up. You don't want them to get down at an angle where they can see under the decoys and spy on you guys who are laying down, moving down there, talking to your buddy and blowing calls and huffing and puffing with your face turning bright red, blowing a lesser call out there in Oklahoma in the middle of January. It's frustrating. So make sure that you think about that. And when you set your spread up, when you're done setting it up, take a step back, look at it, see if you can see under the decoys to where guys are hiding, or see if it just looks like a whole bunch of decoys. When I'm running clients, typically, before hunting starts, I will get them, not only will I, get up and do the typical safety speech, talk about shooting lanes and all that, but then I take, 30, 50 steps back and I look at them. I start all the way back and I work my way up. And as the angles change, as I pass certain groups of decoys, I want to make sure that guys are hidden all the way up to where I'm right on top of them to give us the best odds of having geese work in close. So that's all stuff to work about. And that's most of what I wanted to talk about as far as the windy day hunting. So just in review, calm wind days, spread your decoys out. It gives those birds a long time and a lot of area to either look for your hide or circle down and get low and then work in close, hopefully giving you a better shot. And then on the windy days, you want those spreads a little bit tighter. On the calm wind days, we want to not use any socks. And on the windy days, we want to use more socks to give us motion and to give the spread more realism. Calling lighter on the calm wind days is not only going to sound a little bit less aggressive and intimidating to these birds, but it's also not going to give away your hide, as opposed to the windy days when you can get away with some more calling to keep them coming and use that distortion that the wind's going to create to give you a little bit of an extra advantage, all right? Then we want to always think about what angle these birds are going to be approaching us. Are they going to be coming from behind us and then working their way around and hooking in? Are they coming from in front of us, down low, up high? These are all things that we need to consider because, again, if you don't have a good hide, you don't have anything. You need to be hidden first and foremost, and then all of these other factors come into play. So that's going to wrap it up today on this episode of Field Facts with Forrest. Again, please keep submitting your questions to Forrest, F-O-R-R-E-S-T, at divebombindustries.com. Not only will I try to answer your questions here on the show and get you a free hat, but also I'm going to take the time to send you an email, answer your question right away for you so you get an answer, and I get to use it on the show to try to answer that question for other people out there who have that same question. So please keep sending those to me. Also, please like and subscribe to the video. Press that little bell down there so you get the alert so you don't miss out on any of these episodes. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time here on Field Facts with Forrest.